I just saw the movie Obsession, and I have to say it might be my favorite movie of the year so far, at least my favorite scary movie for sure. Before you watch the rest of this video, please know that I will be getting into spoilers, so if you haven't seen it and you want to see it before it gets spoiled, go watch that first, then come back to this video. But there's a moment in it where you stop watching it like it's a horror movie, and you start watching it like it's a confession. And that's what makes this movie so uncomfortable. Not because of the gore, not because of the jump scares, but because the entire film is built around a fantasy that a lot of people have probably had at some point. Wanting someone to love you back so badly that you start believing you deserve it. Curry Barker takes that idea and turns it into something genuinely disturbing. And what shocked me the most about this movie is that by the end, I didn't think Nikki was the villain at all. One of my favorite things about Obsession is how it just leans into the awkwardness. The horror isn't immediate, it slowly crawls under your skin. At first, Bear almost feels sympathetic. You feel bad for him. He's lonely, insecure, emotionally stunted, and clearly obsessed with Nikki. Long before all the supernatural stuff even begins. And the movie intentionally frames him like the protagonist of a romantic comedy. Even from the first scene when they're in the diner and he's kind of thinking through, what am I going to say to Nikki? And that's the trap. Because once the wish actually works, the movie starts exposing how horrifying forced affection really is. There are so many scenes where Nikki gets way too close physically, stares too long, talks with this desperate intensity, and instead of feeling romantic, it feels invasive. The genius part is that these scenes mirror behavior that movies usually glamorize. If this were a traditional romantic comedy or romance movie, some of these moments would be framed as passionate, but Curry Barker changes the tone just enough to make you realize how terrifying Obsession actually looks when you strip away the fantasy. And the movie keeps escalating that discomfort. The dinner scene, I could go on and on about the dinner scene. The sudden emotional swings, the moments where Nikki completely loses autonomy. The way Bear keeps trying to convince himself that things are, basically okay. That's what makes the movie tense. Bear knows something is wrong almost immediately, but he still wants that fantasy badly enough to keep going. And honestly, that fact, that's scarier than the supernatural elements. After I watched this movie, I really thought about the morality of the wish that Bear made. The central question of this movie is actually pretty simple. If someone only loves you because you force them to, is that love really worth anything? And the movie's answer is pretty brutal. No, not even a little bit. Bear doesn't wish for Nikki to be happy. He doesn't wish for a healthy relationship. He doesn't even wish for the courage to tell her how he feels. He wishes for ownership. He wishes for her to love him more than anyone in the entire world. And that's the key difference. And I think that's why the film has hit such a nerve online. Because the movie is really about entitlement disguised as romance. Bear keeps rationalizing his actions because he sees himself as a good guy. But the film slowly dismantles that entire idea, scene by scene. A lot of people think horror movies need some giant metaphor to be smart, but Obsession works because its metaphor is painfully direct. You cannot manufacture genuine love. You cannot override another person's agency and still call it romance. And even if you got exactly what you wanted, you'd eventually realize it's hollow. The wish corrupts Nikki physically and emotionally, but I think the movie implies that Bear was already morally compromised before the magic even started. The supernatural element just externalizes it. And what I really appreciate is that the movie never lets him fully escape responsibility. Even when things spiral out of control, the film keeps reminding us this all started because Bear wanted control more than connection. The final point I want to talk about with this movie is that Nikki is not the real villain. And if you've been listening this whole time, you've probably got that. This is probably the most important thing I took away from the movie. She's the victim. And I think the movie makes that clearer and clearer as it goes on. Yes, she becomes violent. Yes, she becomes terrifying. Yes, she does horrible things. But the film constantly emphasizes that her mind and emotions are being distorted against her will. You see that time and time again. That's what makes her performance so tragic. Indy Navarrete plays Nikki almost like someone trapped inside her own body. And I hope I said her name the right way. There are moments where you can see flashes of confusion and panic underneath the obsessive behavior. Like some part of her knows this isn't real. And honestly, the ending completely confirms that interpretation. The final scenes aren't framed like the monster has been defeated. They're framed like the aftermath of abuse. Nikki surviving is honestly more disturbing than if she died. Curry Barker even talked about changing the ending from a darker Romeo and Juliet style version because this version felt more emotionally devastating. Because now she has to live with the trauma of actions committed while she was essentially stripped of being able to control what was going on. She did not have agency. She was not the one in control. And that's completely horrifying. And it recontextualizes the entire movie. By the end, Nikki isn't some evil, obsessive girlfriend stereotype. She's a person whose identity was overwritten by someone else's desire. That's why I think calling her the villain misses the entire point of the movie. The real villain is obsession itself. Yes, you could argue that Bear is the villain because he's the one that made the wish and caused this whole thing in the first place. He's the one that chose to take away Nikki's autonomy. But obsession itself is the villain. The desire to possess another human being completely. What really impressed me about Obsession is just how confident of a movie it feels. This could have been, some kind of edgy nonsense movie in the hands of some other director, but Curry Barker understands restraint. He lets the scenes breathe, sometimes a little too well, because there are scenes with Nikki where I felt so uncomfortable, and all I could think about is please cut away, please cut away, please cut away from this scene. But no, we just kept staring straight at Nikki, and it got a little uncomfortable. But that was the point. That was part of the movie. He uses silence incredibly well, and the movie constantly balances some dark humor with genuine dread. When I was reading through some reviews, a lot of reviewers have compared the film to a twisted romantic comedy mixed with there's some body horror elements and psychological horror, and somehow it all works. The sound design is incredible. The lighting gets increasingly hostile as the movie progresses. The number of shots with her as a silhouette made me so uncomfortable, where you have this dialogue from her, and the shot is just looking straight at her, and it just made me so uncomfortable when she was talking and you couldn't see her, but everything she said was just so disturbing. And the performances sell every single uncomfortable second. Bear and Nikki are phenomenal in this movie. I can't remember the actors' names, Indy, and I can't remember his name. But the actors in this movie completely sell it. Michael Johnston. He does a really difficult thing here because as Bear, he has to remain believable even while becoming increasingly selfish and morally compromised. And I thought he did a fantastic job with that. But obviously, the standout performance was Indy Navarrete. She was phenomenal. Honestly, my favorite performance of the year. I love horror movies, so I'm a little biased, but she did an incredible job at making me feel completely uncomfortable and tense through this whole thing, this whole story. She was just a standout throughout the whole movie. She has to switch between vulnerable and loving and terrifying and just hollow at times and emotionally shattered at other times. And sometimes she swaps between all of that in the same scene. And the way she swaps between her feelings and emotions, it's crazy. It is unsettling. And I watched an interview because at first I didn't believe it was her. I thought there was some weird cutting that was going on between one scene and another. But after listening to her and Curry Barker, that was just her. That's all her. So she is that good of an actress. And without that performance, I honestly don't know that the movie itself would have landed like it did. I don't know if it would have been as emotional or as disturbing, but it is such a good movie, and it hinges on their performances. Finally, Obsession isn't scary because it has a cursed object. It's scary because it understands something deeply uncomfortable about human desire. A lot of people don't actually want love. They want certainty, control, validation, possession. And the movie asks, if you could force someone to love you, would you still respect them as a person? And that's the question that lingers at the end credits. Not whether the curse was evil, not whether supernatural elements made sense, but whether Bear's wish was morally rotten from the very beginning. And honestly, I think the movie's answer is yes. This is one of the most uncomfortable horror movies I've seen in a long time. Yes, there's some shocking parts, but mostly because it refuses to let obsession hide behind romance. And that's what makes it stick with you.